Hi, everybody. We'll give everyone just a couple of minutes to get into the room before we begin. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Westdale Theatre's Canadian Film Talk series. My name is Jeff Bender, and for our final installment of this series, we will be discussing Denis Villeneuve's 2010 film, Incendies. Originally, we had planned to have a guest speak about the film, and though there were scheduling conflicts, we would like to still extend our gratitude to the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic, who wish to send their regrets for being unable to attend tonight. As usual, during tonight's talk, if you have any questions or thoughts on the film, please open the Q&A option on your screen and type away, and I will do my best to get to as many of your contributions as time allows. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the chairman of the board at the Westdale and our film guru over the past year, Mr. Fred Fuchs. Good evening, Fred. I hope you are well, sir.
I'm fine. A little warm, as I'm sure you all are. It's amazing we get what we ask for, but anyhow, not as bad as out in BC, fortunately. Anyhow, thank you all for joining tonight. As you probably know, I think we've made it, maybe we haven't made it clear, this is actually going to be the last of our film talks. It's been quite a long ride. We started this back on March 30th of 2020 with a film called American Graffiti. There have been 42 film talks. Actually, I'm quite curious if there's anyone out there who actually came to all 42 film talks. If you did, please let us know, because you're certainly deserving of some free passes to the Westdale once it opens, and we'll be using the honor system. But even if you came close, I'd be just curious to know. Obviously, this film is a challenging film and very sad and difficult film to watch. But, you know, I felt it was important to include a French-Canadian film. Obviously, the French-Canadian industry is a very, very vital part of the Canadian cinema landscape. Very successful films being made, brilliant filmmakers, brilliant actors, brilliant talent. And these films are actually incredibly successful in French Canada and often in the rest of the world. There's a very loyal audience of French Canadian cinemaphiles who go to these movies, and they do very well. And I think, as we've discussed before, often the talent involved stays in French Canada and stays in Quebec and continues to work there for most of their career. This is not true, though, of Denis Villeneuve, the writer-director of this film. He did go to Hollywood and has enormous success in Hollywood. He's probably one of the top 5 directors in the world right now. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. You know, this is, it turns out, you know, not that we planned this 6-7 weeks ago when we chose the film, that it does feel like this film is very relevant to today, even though it was made in 2010. This film ultimately is a story about ending the cycle of violence. Violence and, you know, and the evil that's been perpetuated on so many marginalized people or minorities all over the world for so many years. It's just one of the most, you know, kind of challenging parts of being a human being sometimes, to understand or try to make any sense of the behavior that we see, you know, people exert, this kind of senseless and futile hatred that comes often from religion and often seems to be inspired by some idea that that they're, you know, somehow going to, you know, kind of by being right and by getting other people to accept or agree or believe in what you believe, that this is actually a great and wonderful thing. I mean, there are reminders all the time. Obviously, the most recent one here, of course, is all the new information coming out about the residence schools and just incomprehensible, you know, to me, and I'm sure to many of you. And these were, you know, run by the, you know, the Roman Catholic Church, who knew very well what was going on, and that this was a not just a philosophy, this was a program that they thought and believed in because they were right, and perpetuating the kind of violence that they did was okay because it was all done in the name of religious right, you know. So sad. And of course, it's very interesting because this film also reflects a theme that we saw last week in Atan Nar Yuat, where also a film about violence and the cycle of violence. And I thought it was very interesting to talk to the director, Zach, about how he changed the ending of the original, you know, myth or story that had been told for 1,000 years, in which at the end, Atan Nar Yuat does kill, you know, Oki and, you know, and the evil brothers. And then the violence continues. And he chose to not show that ending and to instead show an ending where somehow this cycle of violence is broken. So sort of interesting that both these films have somewhat similar themes. And again, you know, incredible story of why and how these things come to pass and what happens with, you know, and the anger. Now, as I read more about this and why Denis Villeneuve came to this film, what was most interesting to me was he was not terribly interested in the political issues of the film. And, you know, who was right or wrong, and, you know, why they were even fighting, and are they fighting about something important? But what he was so drawn to was this kind of family story, a story about anger, you know, the violence, how people act. And again, how do we ever break this cycle? The word itself, incendie, is French for conflagrations or fires. And in many countries, it kept the same title, including the US. You know, unusual that the French word is still the title. Often it's translated into English. And then sometimes it was translated and they added a subtitle, The Woman Who Sings, which again, you know, as you know from the film, is a very powerful metaphor and part of the film. Now, this was all based originally on a play. It was quite a successful play done in 2003. And I may not be saying his name properly, Waji Muawad. It was fairly successful, translated into English, published in English. And the play itself was based, you know, in some part on a real person, on, you know, a Lebanese communist, Soha Bekhara. And you know, and the playwright had read about this individual and, you know, loosely adapted, but some of this was very clearly, you know, where it came from. And though he did change the characters around a bit. And in fact, in the play, Nawal is really prominent in the main character, while here we see the role of the two children, Jeanne and Simon, is much more developed. Interesting how the movie, never really says where this is taking place. Obviously the Middle East, probably Lebanon, but it's never identified as Lebanon. You know, I think that was very intentionally done. So we don't get caught up on the politics of who's right and who's wrong in this film. We're watching just human beings and the way they behave and how they behave and how people become radicalized and how they become violent and where does this and how does this continue to be perpetuated. It absolutely is true from the original story, this idea of the assassination attempt, you know, the story about being imprisoned. All of this is actually somewhat accurate and somewhat based on this original story. Again, when Denis Villeneuve saw the play in 2003, he immediately was drawn to it as a potential film. And he spent over 5 years adapting it, working on this screenplay, trying to get it into the shape of a film that he was prepared to direct. Of course, it was financed through the usual methods here, not a big budget film, though it did have some epic scope. They did shoot on location, obviously, in Jordan for 15 days. And he did co-write the screenplay during all those years. And I think he did an amazing job. I mean, what can I say? This is a very, very complicated story, and it's told in a very complicated way. The fact, of course, that the narrative is told, you know, we're continually jumping in time and place, and sometimes we get a little disoriented, and you know, we don't spend a lot of time with a lot of exposition explaining everything. We're just kind of in an experiential mode of here I am, and here's what I'm feeling. And again, the cinematography, the music we'll talk a little bit about, are all used so powerfully to create, you know, very, very deep emotions and create some very uncomfortable moments, you know, watching this film. I mean, I'd seen it before, I'd seen it on the big screen, was overwhelmed. Watching it this week on television, it's hard to watch at times, but I think at the same time, I never felt any of it was done gratuitously. It wasn't done in such a way just to, you know, get me, you know, my adrenaline going, getting all emotional. It was all done in the service of the truth, you know, and telling this story and doing it effectively, and allowing, you know, a person like myself to try to get inside of these characters and really try to understand what it is that happens to people, and how, and is it possible that they can act the way they do, and the violence that they can perform, and the way they can treat other human beings, and why. And in that respect, I think it really, really did an incredible job, you know, making this all work for us. The play, you know, again, Villeneuve, he called it a masterpiece. He called it a modern story with a sort of Greek tragedy element. Again, I think that's what he was attracted to, that sort of Greek tragedy, Shakespearean quality. You know, he really, there's not a lot of dialogue in the film. At one point, Villeneuve thought about doing this almost like a silent movie, you know, trying to, you know, not make it all about long speeches or explanations. And then, of course, the playwright was very reluctant at first to even give him the rights. It was a very personal story for him. And it took him quite a while finally for them to all agree that there's now a screenplay that was really worth, you know, making a film. In between, Villeneuve did 2 other films because this one just wasn't ready. And ultimately, Nawal, the playwright, called this brilliantly elegant, and gave him all the credit, you know. So what can I tell you about Villeneuve? He, let's see, he grew up in Montreal. He started off in, hold on one second, in documentary work. You know, one time he was going to be a scientist, but he did study film in the University of Quebec and Montreal. He started working in television documentaries, worked with Radio Canada. Very young at the, you know, age, he already had success with some short films, and by 1996, he had already done a number of things. He first did a feature in 1998, which I'm not sure I can pronounce properly, but it was screened at Cannes. And then his first big film was called Maelstrom, and it was in 2000. And that was the film, you know, again, very sad, kind of tragic story about a depressed alcoholic woman who falls in love with the son of a man who she accidentally killed in a hit and run. Very, very complicated, interesting story. Very good film, well worth watching. Won some Genies, won the Genie, which is the, you know, the Canadian Academy Award for Best Motion Picture. You may also have heard of his film called Polytechnique, This was done in 2009, and that was based on the mass shooting that took place at the Montreal College in 1989. Again, it swept all of the Genie's, very, very successful film, nominated for an Oscar as Best Foreign Language Film. This film as well was also nominated for an Oscar as Best Foreign Film, won the Genies, was very, very successful film, both critically and also in terms of box office. Did not win any Academy Awards, but well recognized sort of as the powerful film it is. At that point, Villeneuve did start working more in English language and in Hollywood. He did a wonderful film called Prisoners in 2013. His first big successful Hollywood type movie was called Arrival. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's a wonderful film. And then since then, he's really gone on to do some great work. He did the Blade Runner, remake with Ryan Gosling. It's very good. And he's also just finished doing Dune, which I'm very excited about. That's supposed to be an incredible film. And of course, it's one of my favorite books. And seeing what he manages to do with this is going to be exciting. The story is just incredible, right? That opening scene, here are these brother and sister being told, here are 2 letters, and one is for their brother they never heard of, and one is for their father who they thought was dead or was unknown, and they didn't know anything about him. The metaphor, which, curious if it all worked for you or not, about this 1 + 1, does it make 1? And of course, Jeanne being a mathematician, it's an interesting puzzle, and becomes, obviously a mystery and a thriller, because these kids are, pretty intelligent, and they're, although obviously have great emotional challenges around finding out this information and learning that their mother probably had this whole other story of her life that she never talked about, that they knew nothing about. And she sets them off on this quest, to figure out what is it, and what is this, what is this mystery? And as we do find out, it's beyond anything any of us could have ever imagined, right? Casting of the film must have been incredibly complex, particularly the casting of Nawal, because you have to see her at so many different ages. And for a long time, they thought they were going to have to use more than one actress, because, they needed someone who's playing whatever, 18 years old or 17 at the, and then later on as this older mother. But they did find this Belgian actress, Lubna Azabal. Again, I'm so sorry I butchered these names, but they did find her, and she had done a few French language movies, and she was 30 at the time. But Villeneuve was convinced that she could play 18. And then, of course, with makeup, play the older woman. Fantastic performance. I just don't even know, can't even imagine, what an actress goes through to get to those moments in the film of such truth and honesty and just raw emotion. Really, really amazing. The rest of the actors were mostly from the Canadian actors. Jeanne, Mélissa Désormeaux-Poulin, very generous actress. Interesting, was known more for comedic fare than doing heavy drama, but someone that Villeneuve knew and believed that was very capable of it. Very complicated dialects, obviously. There was quite a bit of work that had to be done with all the actors, getting, dialects right and accents right, and, and the, French and the Arab and all the different, languages. Very complicated to do. The film was actually shot very quickly, 40 days. Only about 15 of them were spent in Jordan. The rest were done back in Quebec, locations and then on stage. I found the locations in Montreal fascinating, sort of showing me a world, where these refugees live that I had never seen before, presented quite like that. I assume it was quite realistic and meant to be shown appropriately. Obviously, the scenes in the Middle East were just spectacular. Some of the landscapes, some of the actual locations that they found. And then of course they had to recreate Beirut. All that was really shot in Jordan though. And of course some of the crews were Lebanese and Israeli crews. And from what I understand, filming some of these scenes was incredibly difficult because this is a reality that these crew people lived with and live with, and unfortunately this still goes on now, right? And to try to be on the set and watch these scenes be recreated and redone, very, very, very difficult, I'm sure. I thought the use of music was very innovative, always been true for Villeneuve's films. That opening track is from Radiohead, the kind of pop band, right? But incredibly well. I don't know if you were close enough to listen to the lyrics of the song, and you and whose army, and like spinning plates. It was very noticeable and very integral to the music, to the film. And in many, many reviews, the comments about the music, again, very curious if you felt the same way and it was done properly. But again, these tracks, Radiohead is, I think, an exceptionally interesting band, and because their lyrics often have sort of a multiplicity of meanings, and because it wasn't sort of period music or music from that, it was kind of dislocating, for the viewer, for me watching, because I'm sort of watching these very kind of realistic scenes with this very modern and very unusual, pop or rock song, but it kind of worked. It kind of made it even more interesting to me, and maybe helped from just being overwhelmed by sort of, like, oh, I'm watching a documentary. It reminded me that there's a bigger picture to this drama, and it also became clear with that music that unlike, Atanar Jouat, where we're just plunged into this world and there's no other perspective, here, there is sort of a little bit of an outside perspective, right? We do sort of get, that we, the audience, the Westerner, is sort of watching the film. I don't know how to describe this exactly. I don't know if you felt what I felt, but somehow I feel like the music and the choice of those tracks helped me find this perspective on the scenes that could have been different without it. So I think that was, very, very brilliantly done. This film played at the Venice Film Festival, the Telluride Film Festival, huge success at the Toronto Film Festival. A lot of people, Villeneuve says, a lot of people said to me that we should show this film to their children, to show them what they've been through, in terms of the immigrants, the immigrant experience. I don't know what this would be like for a child to watch this film, but I do believe that in order for these cycles of violence to end, the truth has to come out. We talk a lot about, the residence schools and, should people be punished or be, forgiven, or should they be, rewarded or compensated? But what really has to happen before anything else can happen is the truth has to come out, and it has to be told, and people have to know what happened. Then we can deal with the consequences, then we can deal with the ramifications, but at least the truth has to be told. And I feel like, although there have been other documentaries and other films, that this was an important film to help people to recognize or perhaps to understand a little, what really did happen and what is happening in the Middle East. But of course, this could have been in Africa, could have been so many places. Again, Christianity, Muslims, it's who's right, who's wrong. The film wasn't trying to talk about those kinds of issues. It was really just talking about what is the nature of what happens to people and what happens when people, especially children, are brought up in this environment. I mean, those opening shots are just harrowing, right? And what it does to a person, and why is it possible then that this kind of behavior can actually take place? So again, the critics were a little bit all over the place. Some people thought it was a bit messy, maybe it was overlong, maybe a little melodramatic, but for the most part, the impressive acting was always, commented on. And of course, it's just the devastating emotional impact. I don't know how anybody can watch this film without really experiencing something quite profound and very moving. So it did get, many, many great reviews. And of course, the filmmaking craft is just superb. The composition of the shots, the pacing, the editing, again, the ability to move from different time periods back and forth kind of seamlessly, but always sort of driving the story forward, giving us little bits of information so maybe we could start to piece together what the mystery was, but never really giving it away, until, ultimately we see, Nawal sees, there's a rawness to this film that's very hard to achieve, in terms of just sort of stripping things down to sort of the bare bones. Very, very kind of elemental filmmaking in that respect. And therefore, I think that added a lot to its powerfulness. Some people found some very interesting correlation to sort of Oedipal themes. And in fact, the myth of Oedipus himself, I don't really know all the details. There was something about his foot that was, I don't know if any of you are Greek mythology experts, maybe you can answer this, but there is something about Oedipus and his foot that may have some parallels to what happens, what's part of this story. But again, you're really, so you could call it a thriller. I'm not sure that's how it should be marketed, but it just so successfully demonstrates how totally senseless and futile it is to just hate each other because of their religion, when, religion is supposed to lift our spirits and bring us closer to God and oneness and love. And I mean, what is the purpose of religion, in our life and spirituality in our life? And again, this isn't the first story that has talked about, the other side of religion and what it's done to people. And again, with this incredible sense of righteousness and fulfilling some kind of psychological need to be right, then means someone else has to be wrong. And that, we have this, legitimate authority over people to do to them what we choose in the name of God, I mean, we've seen it again and again so many times, but it's just spellbinding, unbelievable. The use of the music we've talked about, the math problem. Again, I don't know if I completely understand this. There is something called the Colodus conjecture. Maybe Jeffrey, you know more about this, but it's this idea there's an algorithm that produces the number one out of any positive integer by dividing even numbers by 2 and multiplying odd numbers by 3 and adding 1, the result will eventually produce 1. And this conjecture is, allegorically reflected in the film's climax, which, I don't know. Again, I'd be curious if any of you actually saw that coming and could understand that, it was possible that, that Simon and Jeanne are actually searching for the same person, and that 2 becomes 1, right? Actually, well, now I see in one of my notes that Oedipus actually means swollen foot, and of course, so brilliant because, when, Nihad has his foot tattooed as a baby, it seems so insignificant, but that becomes such an important plot point. And again, Oedipus is trying to uncover the story of his prophecy, and Jeanne and Simon are trying to uncover the story of their brother, again, other themes of, kinship, the way bonds of blood, work, how could her brothers, possibly, want to kill her because she, was, with this Muslim man, and I don't even know if they realized she was pregnant or not, it's really kind of incredible in the whole idea of the scavenger hunt across the Middle East to finally find, what was this, kind of obscure, tragic story, but they did manage to, it all comes out, of course. I love to see Rémy Girard as the notary. He's a great comedic actor and not often known for his more dramatic roles, but I thought he certainly did a good job in his sort of, limited way. Seeing the refugee camps, seeing those villages, you read about this in the paper. I guess we see pictures at times, but this film is probably, as well as any I've ever seen, really immersed yourself into that world, and you start to really understand what can happen, and how one can become this kind of militant activist, and what it means to be a political prisoner, and in the way she goes back and forth between the warring groups, and what her own identity as a Christian, what does that even mean? A lot of really complicated stuff, and again, the performance of Ms. Azabal as Nawal, especially in her middle-aged, it's so powerful because it's very restrained, and it's sort of imbued with this kind of unshakable sense of dignity that she's able to maintain, and in the midst of all of the depth and complexity of her anger, and she's such a this reflection, or a mirror of this self-destructive pathology that these groups in this country has gone through, and the horror of her life. I just, it really could have been just too much and too overwhelming, but by bringing in the perspective of Jeanne and Simon, modern Canadians, unaware of their roots, unaware of their history, somehow, again, brings us a perspective on the story that, gives us kind of a different feeling of it happening in not in a surreal way, but it's funny, some parts of this actually reminded me of some of Adam Egoyan's movies, which don't really happen in kind of completely realistic worlds. They really happen in somewhat, and like we saw in The Sweet Hereafter, it's the real world, but it's sort of always seen with a certain kind of otherworldly perspective. So, I don't know. Very hard for me to talk about some of this because it's so emotional, and I think each person who watches this is going to have their own perspective on it and thoughts about it. But you know, and again, that's why I thought the role of the notary, you know, Lebel was, you know, so, kind of a very good, you know, part, you know, good character as well, because he's always this kind of reassuring presence and, you know, provides a sense of, you know, the calm and safety of the modern world, that not everything is just kind of, you know, just chaos, right? So a little paradoxical, but a really interesting character that I think actually added quite a bit to the film. Let's see. Oh gosh, it's just, you know, the brutality. You know, I know I'm watching a movie. We all know there's a cameraman and, you know, and director standing nearby. But it's when, you know, there are moments where you just, you know, it's just you're so absorbed in it, you just forget any of that is going on. So anyhow, why don't we look at some of the slides, Jeffrey? I'd be curious to talk about the film with some of the incredibly powerful images. Can you share some of these?
Are you able to see those now, Fred?
Yep, we can see it fine. Thank you. So here we go, you know, even with this very opening scene. So, of course, this is Nihad, you know, who later is renamed Abu Tariq. And you can see, you know, and what an incredible face. I don't know, you know, where this character and where this actor came from. But you can see from this very opening scene, you know, what kind of traumatic experience these kids are going through. And, you know, we've always, you know, we've heard about these, you know, boy soldiers and what happens to them. And they really don't have a chance. You know, I mean, you know, you could, you know, this is I don't know what the right, it's indoctrination or brainwashing, or, you know, when you take children at this age and they're treated to this kind of, you know, life and this kind of brutality, and, you know, and watching, you know, these kids with guns shooting each other, it's just amazing to me. But what a powerful image, you know, and really sets us off. And, you know, again, with a mystery, you know, what's going to happen, you know, who is this kid, what is going to happen, when are we going to meet him again? And then, of course, we go to slide 2. Yep, and here we are, you know, with the notary, and Nawal has died, and we hear about the will and testament, and of course, you know, they're set on this path, and, you know, to discover the you know, the father and brother, and unbelievable, right? I mean, just with no knowledge, no preparation, very, very great opening scene that sets everything in motion. The next one. Yeah, so now we're immediately flashback to that pivotal day at the pool. We don't know why. Why are we watching this person swimming? There is something very interesting about just the water, though, and this scene, and kind of the sound, and it's sort of, you know, kind of a meditative moment, and kind of, you know, building the pace, you know, with these kind of quieter moments. But of course, we do go back to it again. It becomes a wonderful, interesting way to, you know, connect scenes. Very, very, very smart filmmaking. Next one. Yeah, so here we are at the pool. Well, something's happened. We don't know what, you know, what's happened to Nawal. She's, you know, almost catatonic and has been startled, but, you know, we're sort of just teased. Here we are, you know, this great, something incredible is happening, and we're going to find out. And so we're really drawn into the story in a very powerful way. Next one. So yeah, now of course we're back in time, and now we see this same, you know, woman is an 18-year-old, and we kind of get a lot of that story very quickly. And we watched, you know, her boyfriend be murdered, and, you know, and her brothers are about to kill her as an honor killing for disgracing the family. You know, it's very hard for us to relate to this, I guess, but this is the kind of power and fear that these people lived with in terms of their religion. and again, we could talk about the politics of all this and why the Christians in Lebanon were there, and of course why their conflict with Muslims. We certainly all understand why that exists, but it's a very sad and powerful story. And the next slide. Yep. So now, of course, we're seeing, the Christian symbolism, the rosary or the cross, and of course she's praying, and this we always hear so much in the Middle East about the conflict between the Muslims and the Jews, but the conflict between the Muslims and the Arab Christians, of course, has been an incredible source of horrible battles and death and sadness, both in Lebanon and in Syria, of course, and Egypt as well. So, I don't want to spend too much time on politics, but next one. So, yeah, here's Nawal, and and her grandmother, of course, the women do understand something perhaps a little deeper than the men. So she is forgiven by the grandmother. She, is saved by the grandmother, promising that she'll go off to be schooled. The mother, the son's going to be saved, which, is an act of redemption, of course. The next slide. And then, of course, the son is going to be placed in an orphanage, but here's where we get this idea of the 3 black dots being tattooed. And, it may be a little bit of a convenient plot point, but it didn't seem, impossibly, ridiculous that perhaps the grandmother is doing this. So one day, sometime, somewhere in the future, Nawal could actually find her son. And it does obviously make for a great story. Next one. Yeah, so now we see Nawal, has been in exile up north. She decides it's time to go look for her son. She comes to the south again. Not completely sure what countries she's in, or if it's the same country, but we begin to see more about, the conflict and what the consequences of the conflict were and how the conflict is being fought. And, it's a very different kind of war than the kind of war that, a military war that, we think of when 2 countries go to battle. These are really, 2 kind of terrorist, militia groups battling, and with a lot of disorganization and just chaos. Next one. Yeah. This actually is a shot that's used quite a bit, in terms of the marketing of this film. But, again, this is, the bus has been destroyed by the Christian nationalists. Just, violence and chaos. Next one. Yeah, again, we've seen this image, we've seen these photographs, too often. And I look at it, and it's almost impossible to believe that this is going on today in this world. Feels very far away from us, but these people aren't so different than us. We're all the same. They're just unfortunately, born and living in a society where, this type of violence and hatred and is just a way of life, and they've not been able to find their way out of it. It's kind of incredible, right? Next one. Yeah, so this is where Nawal is gonna, to me, this was, some of the narrative was a little, but the idea that Nawal is, now joined the Muslim militia, and she's gonna assassinate this Christian nationalist leader. Again, this is loosely based on sort of the true story, but I don't really know how much. And of course, worms her way into his confidence, and she's prepared to basically assassinate him and sacrifice her own life. She's obviously not expecting to escape, and because of what? Because of retribution, revenge. That this is going to change anything. you can't apply the same kind of logical mindset that we might have to this woman and to what she's been through. It's impossible for us to imagine. Next slide. So of course, this is, I don't know if you can see that one well enough or not, but this is now her at the Kfar Ayat prison. She's going to be tortured, raped. The woman who sings, to me, is just so powerful, and this idea of, her defiance and how does she survive, and by drowning out the cries of others, being tortured, by just having this inner resilience that allows her to basically survive the most horrific, life and torture and rape, and unbelievable. Next slide. And here we see, of course, flashing forward, right? And we see her, dictating her final wishes, and now we're really sort of building some momentum about, and the mystery as to what it, how she got from there to here, and what are these final wishes, and what are we going to find out. And next one. Yeah, and now we're back again, and Abu Tariq is sent, because he's the famous torturer. Of course, he also rapes her and becomes, the father of the twins, and so we're starting to uncover some of the secrets of Nawal's past. Next slide. So let's see. So now, Simon does ultimately join Jeanne. This is again his own journey of trying to grow up and become responsible, and so they're personal stories, and of course the first thing they do sort of find out is, of course, that their father is the mother's rapist. That's the first part that comes out, and of course here we are again in water, and Simon sort of in his fetal position, just back in the womb. It's just beautiful imagery and trying to capture some of the emotion that they're both going through. Next. Yeah, so here we are back in time again, right, to the Civil War, and again, Nidal is a great sharpshooter, but just the total utter chaos, in the streets during wartime, and never knowing, who's got a gun, and some 12-year-old kid's going to turn around and shoot you. And I just can't imagine how people really do survive. I think it does speak to the resilience of the human spirit, but I know I have a daughter who worked in refugee camps in the Sudan, and the stories she's told me about how people survive in those camps are just, they're as horrible as you can imagine, but they do. And then of course they grow up, and how can we be surprised that, the Palestinians are, as violent and as full of hatred as they are, when all they ever knew from the time they were little children were refugee camps, right? Next slide. Yeah, so again, incredible landscape of Jordan in the Middle East. It's just, it's just so sad how this area of the world has been under such conflict and so much violence for all of these years, and it wasn't always so. This was obviously a very peaceful place, and of course, Islam as a religion is a fantastic religion. It was probably one of the most tolerant religions, treated for many centuries. It's so difficult because we want to just paint things as good or bad or evil, and of course none of that's ever really true. That all of this is much more complicated than that, but certainly this is a very compelling image. If any of you have ever been to the Middle East, you'll know what this kind of feeling of desert is like. Next. Yeah, so this is where they have this conversation about, the 1 + 1 doesn't make 1. when it's just overwhelming, they can't even really talk about it, Next scene. Yeah, so this, of course, is that incredible moment when Nawal first sees, the foot with the 3 dotted tattoo. She's curious, what is it? And then, of course, it just, her curiosity turns to horror. She's able to look and see her son and torture her in the eye, so, I mean, she knows, Next scene. Yeah, so this again, look at this performance was just amazing. Very little dialogue, all done with, face and, and body and, and again, she was only 30 at the time, this actress, and obviously they aged her, but there's a sort of a weariness and age and kind of you really feel the weight of her life in this face. I think she was amazing. Next scene. Yeah, so, it's so crazy, right? Because here he is and, everything he's done and, he works as a custodian in a bus depot and, is there justice in the world? Is it fair, that a man like him could be living this life in Canada and freedom and, it's just, and, but he's just going about his day-to-day business and hoping no one ever discovers his past and who he is. But who is this human being? How can you? But then if you remember the little boy we saw, at the very beginning of the film, maybe there is some sense of what could happen to a human being, and maybe it could happen to anybody, that maybe this wasn't something unique or different or, about him, and that no one's really born evil or born good. And we're so much a circumstance of our experiences in life. Next. Yeah, so what an incredible moment, right? Where we really have the denouement of the film, and they did deliver the 2 letters and, are able to look this guy, their father and brother in the eye. And then the next, slide. And of course, what are these letters? But these are letters of retribution and forgiveness. And, again, Nawal found this place in her heart where she was able to forgive. Maybe this action and is a lesson to her own children and how to break this cycle of violence. It was something that she didn't have to do. She could have died and just let everything be the mystery it is. But I think she must have recognized that there was something she had to do, or she wanted her children to experience that would be that was just very important, and that the truth had to come out, as we keep saying. We can't continue to just hide things just because they're evil, or because we don't want to look at them, or they make us feel shameful. This is a time where there's no more hiding. The truth does have to come out. Anyhow, sorry, this is all kind of a bummer and a downer, but we've done our time with screwball comedies, and then of course here's our final moment. Nadal visiting the grave of his mother, and again, really beautifully done, beautiful composition. No need for a lot of dialogue or speaking, at this point. So thank you, Jeffrey. Those were great. Any comments you'd like to share with the audience at this point about the film and your own thoughts about watching it again this week? You're on mute. You'd think
I get this right after this much time. No, it was quite gut wrenching. I knew what we were getting into with watching this particular film, and things came to mind as I was watching it. There were moments that felt like documentary on occasion, and I thought that was rather interesting. You mentioned Fred earlier that he had a background.
Yeah,
Denis Villeneuve had a background in documentary filmmaking, and I would say to those that are attending tonight, if you were looking for a film, if you have 9 hours to watch, would be 1985's Shoah by Claude Lanzmann, which that kept coming back to me time and time again. And it's very much about going back into the past in the present. And it involved children. And I think that's the thing that I often forget about, is that the sort of perpetuation of the burden of this sort of victim experience, how it plays out in the lives of children, I found was something that really came to light for me in this particular film. But I would highly recommend Lanzmann's Shoah if you have an opportunity to see it as well. I have a question for you, though. I was wondering, at the end of all things, and we see this image of Nihad, where's your feelings about this guy at the end of it? I'm just curious what your thoughts
Well,
are.
I think the intention of the filmmaker, because I think the intention of the filmmaker is that we have gone through this unbelievable traumatic experience with these characters, because he is trying to say something. And I think he is trying to say something about the fact that we are all really the same. We are all just human beings. And too often we do emphasize the separations that divide us: religion, race, sex, all these kinds of things that divide us and make us think that we're different from each other. And we're not. We're all really one and the same. We're in the same species. We all are here for the same purpose, in terms of our life, on Earth. And that we are, I don't know if the right word is victims, but we are very much a product of the society, the civilization, the family we're born into, the circumstance we're born into. And you could call it fate. I don't know what the right word is, and why is one person get to be born in Western civilization into a happy, loving, supportive family, and another's born, this orphan Nadal, to Nawal, and becomes a boy soldier at 5 years old. And so is he an evil man? Is there something inherently, that makes this person not someone deserving of love and sympathy and understanding? I think the message is he is. And I think, again, the message is that this cycle of violence will never end unless humanity can start to recognize this and realize that this can't and just cannot continue, and somewhere it has to stop, and somewhere someone has to find forgiveness. And that's, and if Nawal can find forgiveness after what she went through in her life for this man, well, shouldn't we as well? And so I think I did feel that at the end.
Yeah, that's very well said. And actually, our friend Margarita put a note in the window here. Thank you for your wisdom, Fred. The movie truly needed this conversation. We got a message from Michael Clays as well. And first of all, Michael says, I thought Incendies was very powerful and moving, harrowing, of course, but mitigated by the strength of the characters and the love and forgiveness that Nawal shows, just as you mentioned. His question, though, is on the central coincidence around which the entire plot hinges, that Nawal should one day meet Nihad in another country and recognize who he really is. Do you think that audiences are less accepting of coincidence as a plot driver in movies than they are?
That kind of use of coincidence has always existed in drama. If you look at the Greek plays, you look at Shakespeare, I don't look at it as coincidence. I don't try to get too hung up on it being a plot point. Again, if you do and it takes you out of the story, then the storyteller was unsuccessful. But for the most part, it's what they call the suspension of disbelief, right? Where hopefully you're involved enough in the story and the emotions of the character that you don't step outside to analyze, oh, this couldn't have really happened, or oh my God, how bizarre is it that this person happened to walk in the door at exactly the same moment that, I mean, look, other people could say, this is all fate and this was all prearranged, on some kind of, higher level before these individuals all incarnated, on the planet. That would surely make as much sense to me as anything else. So I don't know. I think it's not. It's a good question, and it's not wrong to point this out. I think the question for you is simply, did it really, take you out of the story? Or were you able to simply accept that this is a story I'm watching? I mean, because it is a story, it is, it's not a documentary. And this was, a way to tell the story. I mean, and to create an interesting plot. And, and again, it's not really a thriller, it's not really, who done it, this really is just trying to use those kind of, those traditional story elements to get into a much deeper emotional story about character.
Yeah, I always tend to watch a movie based on its own terms often, and unless they start to break the rules, in midstream of the narrative. But I typically go in and I'm all ready to go with where the director wants to take us off, and then I always have a much more stimulating experience, I find, typically. To Robin Butcher's point as well, just a comment and a thank you for including this film. Robin found it was the most gripping of all the films in the series.
Oh, great.
And the only one that they want to watch again. So thank you. Also, for what it's worth, Robin also felt that the big reveal at the end was kind of over the top and kind of distracted from the
No, it was, I don't want to call it a MacGuffin, but in a way it was just
a little bit.
It was a way to get the plot across in a fairly simple and understandable way. And, again, you go, well, why is the grandmother putting this tattoo? Just so, okay, all these years later, someone will be able to recognize it, I mean, but again, you can either just, really focus on that or just kind of accept it as what it is, which is just a device, in a way to tell the story.
Well, by the way, speaking of the sort of Greek legends and the tattoo, David Schreiner did get back to you on your question earlier, that when Oedipus was born, his feet were pierced and bound together, hence there would have been a scar on his heel. So thanks again, David. Appreciate that.
I kind of remembered something like that. I wasn't sure, but clearly, Villeneuve knew that and was working all those elements into this film. And it does give the film this somewhat mythological or somewhat otherworldly quality that I think works really well. And instead of making it too much of a, accurate docudrama kind of story.
Another question I have for you personally Fred, is that throughout the entire series, you've made reference to there being a difference between the Quebec Francophone film industry and the rest of Canada. And I'm wondering, are you able to comment on that at all? Or?
Well, again, I don't know. I mean, obviously, I'm relatively new to the country. I always knew about, French Canadian films and admired them tremendously. I don't know if this is something specific to storytelling in French Canada or French Canadian identity. I attribute mostly just to talent, that, and again, there isn't tons of great talent in English Canada as well, but that in English Canada, most of the great talent in filmmaking and also in music and also in literature leave, and they go to the US, once they've achieved success. And in French Canada, my observation is they often don't leave, even the most talented ones. I mean, Villeneuve obviously has left, Jean-Marc Ballet has left, but many of the actors, many of the directors, the producers, because they don't want to live in Los Angeles. They like their culture. They have a unique culture. They have a unique place. And they also have an audience. They are stars, and their audience loves them. And there are, you know, magazines that talk about them, and they have enormous reward for the work they do, and that doesn't happen in English Canada because they're constantly being just compared to Americans, you know, an American English language people. So that's what I attribute it to, but I really don't know that much about it. But I don't know if it's because they have better film schools or, you know, but my assumption is, and they really know it. I'll never forget the first time I went to the Genies when I came to Canada. That's like the Academy Awards. And that's both for French language and English language, you know, movies. So directors from both, you know, and actors. And it was just amazing because the French Canadians, actors and actresses, were movie stars, and they were all dressed up, and they had gowns and sharp jackets, and they dressed like movie stars, and they act. And then, you know, the Canadian English movie stars, and they were, you know, they were stars too, you know, equally well known. But they were like, you know, wearing jeans and, you know, and being cool, and, you know, and they didn't get it. They didn't get what it meant to be a movie star, you know, which, you know, the French do. And I thought that somehow was a little bit symbolic and, you know, was confusing to me at first, but sort of a little bit of recognition of how they even think about themselves differently, and what their role in their culture is, and the importance of what their role in their culture is. So, you know, there's definitely, you know, huge difference.
Well, thanks for the perspective on it, Fred. Amy Handronicles has also mentioned that she thinks, and thanks us for the series, but thinks the Canadian series of talks has been the best. It's an incredible series.
Oh, I'm so happy. Yeah, I was a little concerned about doing it simply because it wouldn't have the appeal of screwball comedy or film noir, but, you know, but this is an important part of what the Westdale's vision has always been, right? Because, you know, as a charitable independent cinema, you know, we really think we take our role very seriously about supporting Canadian film and Canadian filmmakers and Canadian culture, and also music and other arts. And so it would not have been appropriate for us to have done 42 films and not taken time to focus on the Canadian films. And I'm so glad that some of you have enjoyed it. Actually, our attendance did go down. You know, we were averaging 60, 70 people. Now we only got about 40 people, but that's okay. We're not, you know, it's quality, not quantity we're after. And anyhow, so what can I say, guys? This has been so much fun for me. I think I've learned a tremendous amount, you know, about film, watching the films, talking with you, doing the research. It's helped me so much during this pandemic to continue to stay, you know, involved in the film world and involved with you as our community. This is the end for now. That's not to say we won't do online programs again and more film clubs and all that, but we are getting ready to open. We believe, you know, again, depending on what happens, that we'll be opening on July 22nd or July 23rd. We don't have any big announcements yet about films and about different things we're going to do yet, because of course we don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty still. How many people will be allowed in the theater? What if there's another outbreak? Are we going to be able to have concessions or not? You know, what films will be available? But one thing for sure we are committed to do, which is to continue to provide this kind of diverse and inclusive programming. And we are going to have special themed nights, you know, once a month, where we'll have a Hollywood Classics night, and we'll have an international film night, and we're going to have a Francophone film night, and really try to also bring as many speakers and guests and interviews and everything else we can, and some of the films you'll never heard of, but hopefully, you know, we've developed some, you know, relation, and you recognize, I mean, this is our job, is to curate and to bring you the kinds of films that maybe you haven't seen before, or something that's a little bit different. We're not trying to just show, you know, the same thing Cineplex Odeon shows. And so all of this is just been a wonderful time and a wonderful experience. I can't wait to see you all again at the theater. Clearly, you know, we'll need your economic support, you know, buy memberships, come to the theater, donations always appreciated. You know, it's going to be, you know, challenging financially, but somehow we always seem to figure out how to get through it. And I really do believe that, you know, we have an amazing cinema. Obviously, you know, for those of you who've been there and seen the projection and the quality of the Art Deco, you know, heritage restoration, it's a very unique and special place. So, and thank you, Jeffrey. The amount of time and energy you've put into this, creating these slideshows. You know, Jeff also hosts 2 of our film clubs, the International Club and the Classics Club. We couldn't have done any of this without you. So such a huge debt of gratitude, and you know, I look forward to us all meeting in person for the first time, maybe at the theater. And we met in person once, but you know, it's kind of amazing how we've developed these relationships in this virtual world. But there you go. So anyhow, good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I look forward to seeing you all really soon. Take care.
Good night, everybody. Thanks, Fred.
You bet.